Glad to have you with us. This is Business Incorporated, and I am busy at Debayo. Coming up today, Budweiser Brewer prices IPO at 27 Hong Kong dollars in second biggest offering for 2019. And South Africa raises $5 billion via 2 new Eurobonds. Plus, the UN appoints 2 Nigerians and 25 others to tackle global malnutrition. Well, let's kick off right away with the market, starting from here in Africa, where most of the markets are pointing down south at intraday. The Nigerian All-Share Index was down 0.71%, and the DSE Index was also 1.39% lower at intraday. In Egypt, the EGX 30 is yet to recover from multi-year lows following protests over the weekend. The index was down 4.08% as at intraday. And in Kenya, the Bourse closed Monday session up 0.22%. And in the Middle East, the Abu Dhabi index saw a marginal gain at intraday, and the Dubai index was down 1.13%. The Qatar index was also down 0.43%, and the Saudi index was 1.07% positive, also at intraday. And in Europe, most of the markets traded higher on Tuesday as traders monitor the latest U.S.-China trade developments, as well as the Supreme Court ruling coming from the UK. Well, let's get details from Orich Bats at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. It's good to see you today, Orich.
Hi. Nice to be back. Thank you.
All right, so let's begin our conversation with the UK Supreme Court ruling on Boris Johnson's decision to suspend the Parliament for 5 weeks. Now, what's the reaction from your end?
This is a historic decision. The reaction is not all that great in the markets, but it's, of course, one of the major topics today. The FTSE is losing just slightly. Sterling surged briefly all the way up to $1.2490 when the news came, but has since settled down. And the market across the rest of Europe, here in Germany, for example, has also settled down. The DAX hardly moving as we speak. But of course, there is still the outcome that's very open. The chances are higher, say many investors also, along with other people, that there won't be a Brexit without a deal. Indeed, there might not even be a Brexit, depending on the fate of the present government under Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Maybe there are new elections, maybe there will be a new government in place that will be able to change the direction the country is taking. But of course, it could all be very different. And so people are, the initial reaction was positive. We saw that most clearly in the Forex side. But they're still wary of what's to come. There have been so many about turns in Britain on this matter.
All right, away from the UK now to Germany, where you are, where the prosecutors say they have charged Volkswagen's chief executive, the former boss, and supervisory board chief with market manipulation, and that's in connection with the diesel scandal, which has cost VW so far more than 30 billion euros. Tell us more about this.
Yes, the Volkswagen share went down immediately when the news came. People not totally caught unawares that there might be an indictment, and that indeed it might go to trial. That decision comes later, and that indeed there might be a guilty verdict at the end of it. But still, they were surprised at this move now. And why is it going down, the share? Because in this 636-page indictment, the prosecutors are saying that the three, Herbert Diess, the CEO today, the board chairman Hans-Dieter Pötsch, and former CEO Martin Winterkorn, deliberately informed capital markets too late about the significant payment obligations with reference to the billions arising from the Dieselgate scandal. And what does it mean if the three were indicted and then found guilty in the end? Well, that would lend more credence to all those damage claims, also asking for billions in losses suffered to shareholders. So if there was a prosecution and a guilty charge in the criminal court, then the civil damage claims could come in, rolling in, and cause further damage. That's why investors are a bit more on the careful side. Volkswagen itself is saying the three are innocent, and there's nothing to the charges. They acted correctly at the time, as they did. Herbert Diess, who's the CEO, also said he has no intention of giving up his post. I just saw, just a few minutes ago, a shareholder advocate here at the stock market and he's familiar with the case. He's acted in similar cases. And I asked him, is it right for someone like the CEO of a company who's indicted on a charge like this to remain in his post, with all those hundreds of thousands of employees looking up to him and asking them that question? He said, yes, in this case he thinks it's right, because everyone who's indicted is presumed innocent until proven guilty.
Absolutely, Orange. Now, just before I let you go, the latest PMI figures brought unfavorable news on business development in the Eurozone and in the UK. And today, the IFO Institute published its latest poll on the business climate in Germany. Did that also go downhill?
Yes and no. It went uphill, actually, the total picture. There's the business climate, which gives the total picture. And for the first time in a couple of months, it went up. And went up by 0.3%, not much, to 94.6 points. Nothing to write home about. And when you look at the level, 94.6, a year ago, the level of the IFO was at 103.6, and before that even, it was on its way down. And economists are commenting on this as a breather, a brief respite, a pause, and basically another in a series of bad news. When you look at the macroeconomic news coming from Germany, one economist described it as a horrific series. So the perception that Germany is still headed for recession is more reinforced than not reinforced by this news. One of the reasons for that, yes, the IFO did go up, but that's due to the assessment of the current situation. But when people look into the future, and really that's the decisive matter for markets, but also for investment decisions, that's declined yet again.
Well, thanks very much, Arij. Well, let's turn to the UK, where the Supreme Court has ruled that the Prime Minister Boris Johnson's decision to suspend Parliament was unlawful. Now, the UK's highest court says it was wrong to stop the Parliament from carrying out its duties. Let's get more on these stories and, of course, how it's affecting the markets today with Simon Pusey in London. It's good to see you again, Simon.
Hi, good afternoon. How are you doing?
All right, so give us details of the court judgment and what reaction are we likely to get from the Parliament and, of course, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who is currently in New York at the United Nations General Assembly.
Yeah, well, as you say, reaction has been coming in thick and fast on this one. As you said, the highest court in the UK has ruled unanimously that Boris Johnson's decision to suspend Parliament for 5 weeks was unlawful. Critics had argued that it was, of course, intended to limit scrutiny of the government's Brexit plans, while the government in turn said it was so they could lay out their spending plans for the future. Well, it means Parliament will reconvene tomorrow morning, and the reaction has been massive here. Calls for Boris Johnson to resign from all angles, really. Every opposition party leader saying he should step down. Former prime ministers like John Major, who was a Conservative prime minister, of course, saying he should at least apologise. And even the Queen has been dragged into all of this, as she was really needed to sign off on this, and many think she shouldn't have been put in that position at all. In the last few minutes, Boris has responded to the news himself. He's in New York, as you say, but he said the government will respect the Supreme Court ruling. He hasn't ruled out proroguing Parliament again, by the way. He's refused to say he wouldn't do that in interviews, but most analysts think even Boris wouldn't be that gung-ho given how unanimous this verdict was.
So are there any reactions to the judgment yet from the financial markets?
Yeah, we've seen plenty of reaction in the markets, actually. Big spikes in the pound, which has been plunging for so long, of course. The pound rose against the dollar and the euro as traders digested the verdict from the Supreme Court that the Prime Minister's decision to prorogue Parliament was unlawful. In the immediate moments following the judgment, the pound rose about 0.5% against the euro. Both jumps have cooled as the markets wait to see what happens next, but analysts and commentators saw the ruling as pretty positive for avoiding future unpredictable decision-making by Downing Street. So let's take a look at those numbers. The markets are down after that initial spike this morning. The FTSE All-Share is down by 0.25%, the FTSE 100 down by 0.14%, and the FTSE 250 down a little bit more, 0.37% there. However, the pound, as I said earlier, is up today on the news, up on the dollar by 0.22%, up by 0.23% on the euro, and also up on the yen by 0.37%.
I would definitely have our eyes on the development or developing story from there. Now, it's been over 24 hours since the demise of tour operator Thomas Cook, but the news is still dominating headlines. Of course, that was before the Supreme Court ruling. But what's the latest development, especially regarding the executives of the company?
Yeah, well, repatriation of those 155,000 UK tourists is continuing today. The main news is a huge criticism of the bosses and the pay that they received at Thomas Cook. Some are seeing this as an easy way for the government to sidestep any criticism that they didn't help out the firm with a loan or by injecting finances in the company to save it. But nonetheless, the numbers involved here are pretty startling. Current and former bosses of the travel firm received payouts worth more than £35 million in the last 12 years. Manny Fontella Nova, who led the acquisition spree that really piled on the debt at the company of over £1 billion, was handed more than £17 million in just over 4 years as the boss of Thomas Cook. He quit in 2011 as the tour operator then came close to collapse. His successor, who was Harriet Green, was paid £4.7 million for less than 3 years, plus a share bonus worth a further £5.6 million. She also claimed £80,000 a year to cover her hotel bills at a 5-star hotel. And finally, Peter Frankhauser, who was in charge when the company collapsed. We've seen interviews with him in the last few days. He was handed £8.3 million, including £4.3 million in bonuses. So, yeah, a lot of criticism for those bosses and the large amounts they were paid. The company will, of course, say, well, they needed the best people to be in place to run the company, and you can only get the best people if you pay them a lot of money. But I think knowing that the company was in £1.5 billion worth of debt when it went under, a lot of people will be questioning why those bosses were paid quite so much.
Well, thanks, Simon. We'll see you again next time. And in Asia, stocks struggled for direction today as weak economic data in Europe fueled fears of slowing growth and weighed on investor sentiment. Shares on mainland China edged up, with the Shanghai Composite adding 0.28% and the Shenzhen Composite also rising 0.33%. In Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Index advanced 0.24% as at the final hour of trading. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 closed fractionally higher. The Topix Index also gained 0.42%. And in South Korea, the Kospi closed 0.45% higher. And Australia's ASX 200 finished its trading just below the flat line at 6,748.9. And U.S. stock index futures were higher this morning at around 5:30 a.m. The Dow futures rose 82 points, indicating a positive open of more than 11 points. Futures on the S&P and Nasdaq were both marginally higher, and the moves in pre-market trade come after U.S. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin confirmed trade talks between the world's two largest economies would resume next month. Well, let's take a break from those markets. Now, multinational bureau Abinvev has priced its Budweiser initial public offering at 27 Hong Kong dollars a share, which is expected to be the second biggest IPO this year. The company is issuing an additional 189.35 million shares to meet market demand, bringing the total offering to 1.45 billion shares on expectations that Budweiser's Apex IPO would raise 39.2 billion Hong Kong dollars. Abinvev says it's working to reduce a debt pile of more than $100 billion that it built up with the purchase of its rival, SABMiller, in late 2016. Budweiser is scheduled to start trading on September the 30th under the stock code 1876 on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And back in Africa, the South African government has raised $5 billion from the sale of 2 new bonds in international markets. The strong demand from investors helped the government raise 25% more than originally planned. The transaction was more than twice oversubscribed, with interest from insurance and pension funds, financial institutions, hedge funds, and others from across nearly all continents. The South African government sees the success of the transaction, believed to be the largest ever of sub-Saharan Africa, as an expansion of investor confidence in the country's sound macroeconomic policy framework and prudent fiscal management. Meanwhile, bank customers in South Africa have been advised to embrace the use of digital channels and withdraw enough money as the banking industry prepares for a shutdown on Friday. The country's financial union plans to shut down ATMs and banking services in what could be its biggest strike in 99 years. The union is upset with the increased digitalization of banking practices, which has caused significant retrenchments, including 1,200 job losses at 91 Standard Bank branches. The South African Revenue Service says the strike may affect tax payments and refund transactions.